Yes, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to another video. This is from Predictive History. Geo strategy update number 8. Why the West is doomed. This got my attention purely because of the title, but it's also got 353,000 views in the last 7 days. I can't talk properly today, guys, forgive me. Well, listen to what he has to say, Mr. Professor Jiang. It is 38 minutes, so I might skip through a few of the parts of the video. So make sure you go and check out the main video if there's anything that I skip through that you want to hear. And then we'll check out the comments like usual. Let's get going.
Good morning, YouTube. So I know that you flock this channel because I am such a sunny and optimistic person. I bring cheer in a world of gloom. You may face some difficulties in your life, but you know that when you watch my videos, I'm going to tell you how great the world is. Unfortunately, today, it's all going to be doom and gloom. I'm going to talk about how the Western world is going to collapse, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. So let me start with a concrete example. I live in Canada, and these past few years, I've just seen Canadian society get worse and worse. And a lot of the issue is this relentless immigration these past 5 years. Millions of people have come into this country seeking a better life. Unfortunately, they congregate in only a few cities where there are economic opportunities.
This is happening across the West, by the way. Australia has brought in 1.3 million immigrants in the past 12 months or so. I believe it's the last 12 months. Correct me if I'm wrong, but in a very short period of time.
And as a result, housing prices have gone up. Inflation has gone up. Cost of living has gone up, but wages have been stagnant or depressed because of the surge in cheap labor.
And this is why people are not having babies and why we have a demographic crisis, because people cannot afford to have children when they are struggling to live.
And in Toronto, if you're not making at least $100,000 a year, it's very hard to get by. And quite frankly, most are not making that kind of money, and most are struggling. So crime has gone up, homelessness has gone up, drug addiction has gone up. It's a very dire situation in Canada.
When I was young, Canada used to be a really safe place. Sorry to keep interrupting, guys. I won't do it the whole video. But when I was young, Canada and Australia used to be an extremely safe place comparatively to the rest of the world, and even places like Sweden and a few European countries. And the mass immigration is what has, in my opinion, caused the rise in crime and danger and insecurity in these places. Now, of course, it's not just that specific thing, the immigration, because it's more like that's the cause and then the effect kind of thing. So because of mass immigration, it's harder to get jobs, blah, 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 blah. I'm sure we're going to hear about this today, so let's see what it's going to say.
Now, it's easy to blame the immigrants. And I don't think the reason are the immigrants. I myself am an immigrant, so maybe I'm biased. But I will say that we came over in about 1983, and my dad was a high school teacher in a village in Canada. My dad was a high school teacher in our village back in China. And we were really thankful for our opportunity to come to Canada, and we felt really blessed because life back in China was just terrible. It's really hard for anyone today to imagine the poverty in China back then during the Cultural Revolution. So in the long term, I don't see Canada staying together. I think Canada will ultimately be dismembered by the United States and be absorbed into the American empire in the next 20, 30 years. I don't think Canada right now can be a sustainable nation.
Big statement. Guys, what do you think? I know there's a lot of fanfare about this not long ago from Trump. I thought it was mostly banter. Do you guys actually think that this is something that might happen in the next 10, 20, 30 years? Let me know in the comments below.
Now, it's really easy to blame immigrants for all this. And most Canadians do, in fact, blame immigrants because that's what they encounter every day. They encounter immigrants not being able to speak English, not following the rules, cutting in line. They watch the news and see immigrants committing crimes. They see immigrants, rich immigrants, buying up these expensive property and making life miserable for everyone. So it's really easy to blame the immigrants. But ultimately, we need to understand why this immigration is happening. And it's happening because of the baby boomers. The baby boomers want three things. They want their pensions to be paid. They want quality, free healthcare, and they want the property prices to go up. Basically, they want the Canadian economy to keep on growing and growing and growing, regardless of the consequences. Now, in order for the economy to grow, there are three main mechanisms to accomplish this. The first mechanism is to exploit resources, because Canada really is the wealthiest country in the world. It has abundant, almost infinite resources, especially fresh water, which is what the world is going to need in the next 100 years. So Canada's an extremely wealthy place, and it can choose to exploit and export a lot of these resources. Okay, that's the first solution. The second solution, which is much more sustainable, is to unleash the entrepreneurial energy of the Canadian people, to encourage more entrepreneurship, more privatization, to reduce the regulatory state, to reduce the red tape. Okay, that's the second solution. And the third solution is immigration. Let's let in more immigrants. Let's let in the rich immigrants to pour cash into the economy. Let's let in poor immigrants so that they work as slave labor for Canadian corporations. So of these three solutions, the Canadian government went with the third solution: increase immigration. Now, a lot of people out there believe that this is a conspiracy, that there's this global international conspiracy out there to dilute national identity, to destroy the idea of the nation state, to reduce the white gene pool. This is all a World Economic Forum white replacement theory conspiracy spearheaded by the Jews. And quite honestly, if the people in charge were this smart, were this well organized, the world wouldn't be in the mess that it is today. You'd be surprised by how idiotic, by how incompetent the people in charge are. So let me explain to you why immigration is increasing, not just in Canada, but also throughout the Western world. Okay, so to understand this, we need to understand the framework of the Canadian nation. What does Canada exist, and what does Canada do? Well, Canada has some certain unique characteristics. First of all, it's a vast nation with almost infinite wealth, surrounded by two oceans, the Pacific and the Atlantic. And so Canada does not have like natural predators as they would in Europe. Canadians grew up in a time of relative peace, safety, and security. The problem, though, is that Canada shares a border with the world's most powerful empire, with history's greatest empire, America. And so in order to prevent conflict between Canada and the United States, the last major conflict between Canada and the United States was the War of 1812. To prevent the conflict, there's almost an implicit agreement between the people of Canada and the people of America. Canadians, first and foremost, are not ambitious. If Canadians were ambitious, then Canada would be at war with America, and America would have absorbed Canada into the American empire a long time ago. So Canadians, the core characteristic of the Canadian identity is lack of ambition in order to maintain peace and stability with America.
Interesting statement again. So does that also apply to Mexico then? Because the US didn't just take out Mexico and absorb Mexico into the US. I'm not sure I quite agree with that. Let me know in the comments below, guys, what you think.
And if you're not ambitious, then you're not going to industrialize, which means that you're going to maintain and safeguard the environment. You'll use some of the environment, but you'll make sure it's self-sustaining. So in other words, Canada is almost like a resource bank for the American empire. The American empire, when it needs, can always draw on the infinite resources of Canada. And so, because of its lack of ambition, there are two main drivers of the Canadian economy. The first, as I said, is resource exploitation, but sustainable, limited resource exploitation. But the main driver of the Canadian economy is immigration. Canada allows rich, corrupt families to come to Canada to hide their wealth. Canada also welcomes cheap labor, poor immigrants like my father, to come to Canada to do all the work.
Same as Australia.
So that Canadians can enjoy their life on drinking beer, drinking Molson's, a terrible beer, by the way, by the cottage. And because of this economic framework, three major religions have developed in Canada to sustain this economic framework. The first religion is environmentalism. So Canadians love the environment. They believe it is their duty, their inherent duty, to protect and love trees. That's the first religion. Second religion is multiculturalism. The belief that diversity is good, mainly because white people love ethnic food. When white people think multiculturalism, they think ethnic restaurants, Mexican food, Chinatown, and so they love multiculturalism.
Guys, Canada is literally the same as Australia. It's basically a cold version of Australia.
But if immigrants become politically ambitious, like the Indians, no, you can't have that. So that's why Indians are so derided in Canada, because the Indians are actually politically active and effective. And but hey, if the Indians stick to making samosas every day, Canadians would love them. So in a multicultural society, what's really important is to be an open society.
The Indians seem to be politically active anywhere they go. Same in the UK. You know, there's a big Indian diaspora in the UK involved massively in politics. Pakistanis as well, and also in Australia. I could even say in New Zealand too. They are very they are politically active. So it's interesting to note that.
And now,
they are also the highest number of immigrants coming into Australia. I haven't looked at the numbers of the other countries, but they are very top at the top for Australia.
Not have a distinct cultural identity, and this has created a lot of problems in Canada. It'll create further problems in Canada. And the third major religion is bureaucratism, right? Because if you don't have your own ethnic identity, if you don't have a core ambition, then you need a regulatory state, a bureaucracy, in order to maintain everything together. You need people to tell you what to do. And Canadians worship authority. Canadians are extremely obedient. Canadians...
Guys, it's the same as Australia, I'm telling you. Literally part and part, like exactly the same.
Believe experts know everything. Okay? So because of these three religions, there are three distinct characteristics about the Canadian individual. Okay? What are Canadians really good at? Well, the first thing is Canadians are really good at following the rules. From birth, Canadians believe that they must obey the rules. The worst thing that can happen is if they break a rule. Second thing that the Canadians really are really good at is being polite to other people, because in a multicultural society, you don't want to offend everyone. But I will say that I have noticed in my most recent trip back to Canada, Canadians are no longer so polite. they're much more passive aggressive than before because of the dire economic situation.
I'm interested to know when he refers to Canadians in this context, is he specifically talking about white Canadians, or is he talking about Canadians of different ethnicities who are acting in this way? I would be very interested to know, because in Canada, just like Australia, no matter where you are from, if you have that passport, you are Australian or you are Canadian. So I'm interested to know the context of what he is saying. If you guys are from Canada, let me know in the comments below what you think.
That Canada is in right now. The third thing that Canadians are really good at, in fact, probably the best in the world at, is being mediocre. Okay, Canadians absolutely have no ambition. In fact, they hate ambition. I remember in high school, because I was poor and I wanted to go to Yale, I was extremely focused on grades. And so my teachers, the word they used for me is ambitious. I'm an ambitious individual. And that's essentially a curse word in Canada.
So Canada has tall poppy syndrome, just like Australia does.
But I will say this. Canada, I mean, if you can just conceptualize heaven on earth, it would be Canada, right? Extreme wealth, extremely generous government benefits. No one will go poor. No one will starve in Canada. No wars, just complete peace. It's almost heaven on earth. And here is an opportunity for people to achieve eudaimonia, right? Eudaimonia is the Greek term for flourishing. Here is opportunity for Canadians to contribute intellectually to the development of humanity, because they have the resources, they have the time, they have the security. No one else does. And so you would expect this tremendous outpouring of human creativity in Canada these past 50 years. In reality, Canadians have, for the past 50 years, chosen to shut off their brains. Okay? Canada is an extremely complacent nation. It's almost like everyone's on Prozac or something. This is Prozac nation. So Canadians are extremely mediocre. I think that after Canada becomes dismembered and joins the American Empire, maybe a generation afterwards, everyone's going to forget Canada ever existed, because Canada has made absolutely no contribution to the world. Canada doesn't really matter in the world, and Canadians are very happy to not matter in the world. So, so now we can understand, if your three religions are environmentalism, multiculturalism, and bureaucratism, well, then there's only one solution for you, right? Because you can't exploit resources because of your religion of environmentalism. You can't encourage entrepreneurship because of your religion of bureaucratism, right? You don't want to reduce the regulatory state. You don't want to promote individual initiative. So the only solution available to you is mass immigration. Okay? And again, a lot of it is just driven by the baby boomers. So now let me explain to you why baby boomers suck. And they suck for three main reasons. The first is that they're the most selfish generation in human history. Second is that they're going to be the longest living generation in human history. And the third is that they want to maintain the empire. All right? So let me go through each one by one. Baby boomers are selfish. Everyone knows this. They had the most luxurious life. But the problem is that if you always lived a life of comfort and security and prosperity, you become a selfish individual because you think you deserve all this. Okay? The other thing is that the baby boomers have a religion, and it's an achievement. It's an ethos of achievement and accumulation. The more, the better. The bigger, the better. The more money I have, the better. The longer I live, the better. I need to accumulate and accumulate and achieve in order to signify my value, my worth. And their greed, their selfishness is destroying the environment, it's destroying the economy, and ultimately it's going to kill their children. Okay, so that's the first thing. Baby boomers are extremely selfish. And that by itself is not really a problem. The problem is they're not dying. Um, and I can understand why, okay? Because at home, I, I'm living with my dad, and my dad is in his early 80s. And as I said previously, he's had this terrible life. 10 years ago, he got diagnosed with Parkinson's. 5 years ago, he had a bad fall while using the bathroom, and now he's paralyzed. And we really thought 5 years ago that was it. He had a few months to live, but he's still going. And so he has Parkinson's. He's basically paralyzed, and he's living his best life. All his life, he's worked slave wages, minimum wage, and now he's collecting a very generous pension from the Canadian government. It's free money for him. He has access to the best health care. Honestly, if we had to pay for the health care, we couldn't afford it, and he would have died 5 years ago. But now, because it's all being paid by the Canadian government, he spent 6 months at a really nice hospital with his own room. Every day, a physical therapist comes to the house and helps him regain some muscle control, and does some cleaning for him. And really, it's his best life. And in his house, he has his own house. And because of all this immigration, he's seeing the property value go up. He's seeing himself getting wealthier and wealthier. If you're a baby boomer who's been taught that what matters is achievement and accumulation, why would you give up now, right? As your life gets better and better, why would you give it up now? So even though, he's bedridden all the time, I see him clinging to life. And I can understand why, because he's been through so much crap. And now he can really begin to enjoy himself. This is really heaven on earth for him. So he doesn't want to die. Okay? But it's not just him. It's the entire generation of baby boomers. Millions and millions of them. And in Canada, they're a quarter of the population. So they control all the political power, they control all the wealth, and therefore they can dictate government policy. I have a friend in New York City, a very famous person, extremely wealthy, like tens of millions of dollars. And she's 90, and she has Alzheimer's, and she can't walk. Most of the time, she's sleeping. She's semi-comatose, basically. And I thought, any day now she could die, but I've been thinking that for the past 10 years. And one day I asked my cousin, who's a doctor, listen, if you're 90 years old and you're senile, you have Alzheimer's, you can't get out of bed, but you have unlimited wealth, how long can modern medicine keep you going? Like, how long can you survive? She has like 4 full-time caregivers to make sure that, she's taken care of. And my cousin, the doctor, said to me, she can go on for another 20 years at least. Another 20 years at least. So these baby boomers aren't dying, okay? So the baby boomers have captured all the wealth of society, and they refuse to share any of it because of their achievement ethos, and they're not dying. So, but then there's actually a much bigger problem, which is that baby boomers are wedded to the idea of empire. Last year, I was in Brooklyn, visiting some friends. I got invited to a party, and this party was full of China experts. So apparently, every China expert in the world is from Brooklyn. So after COVID, when they were forced out of China, they all returned to Brooklyn, and so I met all of them at this party. And I was talking to one lady, very, very, very wealthy, comes from a very powerful family, and and she was a baby boomer, and I discussed with her. We were talking individually, one-on-one. I said to her privately my fears about the American political system. I said my fear is that given the trajectory of American foreign policy, which is like extremely non-existent, I said there's a danger that America could be fighting wars on 3 major fronts. America could be fighting simultaneously Russia, Iran, and China. And then she looked at me and said, that's fine. We're America. We're the indispensable nation. We can do this. We can take on all 3 and defeat all 3. Does not matter. Okay? That's the arrogance of empire. All right, so let me give you an image of what empire is. And for this image, I'm going to draw.
America is strong, though, to be fair. Like, levels above the rest strong. Technology that you don't even know they have. They have. You know what I'm saying? So, it does sound arrogant, but there are levels, man. There are levels.
On the play The Bacchae from Euripides. If you have not read Euripides, you must read Euripides, one of the greatest playwrights in human history. So he wrote the play The Bacchae about the year 400 BCE. And this is like after the Peloponnesian War, when Athens, the Athenian Empire, which had become basically a mafia state, basically decided to go to war against the entire world, and thousands and thousands of the young people died in these wars of empire. And so Euripides wrote the Bacchae almost as a critique of empire. And so the ending of the Bacchae goes like this. There's a religious festival in the mountains, and these women are all drugged out, okay? They're hallucinating. And as part of the religious festival, they sacrifice a man who's the king of Thebes, Pentheus. And so what they do is they capture him, they rip him apart, okay? They physically rip him apart. They rip up the limbs, they rip up the legs, they dismember him. And the person who rips off his head is actually his mother, Agave. And after she does this, she becomes ecstatic. And she takes the head and she runs back to the city of Thebes, and she proclaims to the citizens, look at what I've done. And she's holding the head of her son, Pentheus, in her right hand. And she's saying to everyone, this is a lion's head. You see how brave, you see how powerful, you see how virtuous I am for fighting a lion and ripping his head off. And then everyone looks at her aghast. They don't believe that she can't see the truth. And so finally her father, Cadmus, has to tell her, Agave, that's not a lion's head. That's the head of your son. So that's what an empire is, okay? If you want to know what an empire is, remember the image of a mother holding the head of her son and proclaiming to the world, look how brave, powerful, and virtuous I am. An empire is a system where the old sacrifice the young for their glory. Okay, that's what an empire is. And that's what the baby boomers want. They grew up in a time of the Pax Americana. They don't want to see it die in their lifetimes. They rather burn down the entire empire. They rather sacrifice their own children and their grandchildren than to lose the idea of empire while they're alive. Okay? So that's why the baby boomers have basically told the American government to launch these wars around the world to save the Pax Americana, because that's the system they grew up in. That's the system they want to die in. The Pax Americana, the Anglo-American Empire. They want to feel virtuous, powerful, and strong. Okay? And they don't care if they have to burn down the world in order to do so. And so the question then is, what can we do? Well, you think about it, there's nothing we can do, because as I said, the baby boomers are the most dominant political group in the Western world. They control the political system. They control the financial system. They can control the cultural system. And they're our parents. They're the people we love and honor and cherish. I'm not going to say to my father, "Hey, Dad, you're paralyzed. Uh, your life doesn't have any meaning anymore, and maybe it's time for you to rest in peace." And so that the um, rest of the world, the young, can have their place. So one metaphor that I think best describes the world we live in is rat utopia. Rat utopia are a series of experiments conducted by James B. Calhoun in the 60s and 70s. And this was a time of growing abundance in the world. And this is the first time in human history when we escaped scarcity, the problem of scarcity. So we want to look at what would happen if we lived in a world of abundance. So they created these experiments, these colonies, where rats were allowed to live in a world of abundance. There were no predators. There was unlimited water and food. And what happened each time he did this experiment, and no matter how he tweaked the experiment, the result was the same. What happened was the social hierarchy that governed the rat colony collapsed. And Calhoun calls this the behavior sink. And very quickly, the rats start to cannibalize each other. They start to engage in all sorts of brutal activities. And as a result, everyone died out. Okay? So no matter how James B. Calhoun constructed this experiment, ultimately it led to the collapse of the rat colony and the extermination of all the rats. And he struggled with this all his life, and he could never really find the answer as to why this was happening. And the only thing that he could hypothesize is maybe water can be infinite. Maybe security, food, luxury, maybe all can be provided infinitely. But one thing that is not infinite, one thing that is a zero-sum game, is the idea of status. And we are ingrained, the desire for status is inherent to us. We strive for status. So normally in the state of nature, rats will fight each other for status. And the rats who lose, they'll run off somewhere else and they'll build their own colony, or they'll get killed by natural predators. But in an enclosed environment where the rats can't run off somewhere else, then they're forced to constantly fight each other over and over again for status. Peter Turchin, the social scientist, has a concept for this. It's called elite overproduction. Societies collapse over time because too much elite is being produced, and ultimately they will fight each other for the limited positions of power and status. And so we're living in rat utopia. And quite honestly, this is why young people now refuse to have children. It's not just because the economic opportunities for young people are very limited, are very pessimistic, and they are. The real reason is the baby boomers refuse to give up their status. Think about the politicians in Washington, D.C. Many of them, their brains aren't even functioning, and they're still there. And so...
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with everything. I like his explanation. I like his theory. It's interesting to hear some of the points, but I think there's just too many holes in this theory. I like this guy. I've watched him before, but I don't always agree with some of the things he says. And, maybe if he supported... I know it can be hard when you're just talking to a camera, but if you could support some of your theories with actual specific reference points. I mean, the reason why people aren't having kids these days is because of the cost of living. Okay, guys, I'm telling you, even if I wasn't rich, but I could have whatever I wanted in this life, I would probably have dozens of kids, because why would you not? You can support them. That's really the point of life, to pass on your genetics. But the fact is, guys, I can't. I can't do that. I can't have dozens of kids. I wouldn't be able to support dozens of kids, and so therefore I don't have them. You know, just having dozens of kids means that you have to have a big enough car to take your kids everywhere. You have to have a big enough piece of land for it. These things are out of the average person's reach, in my opinion. Jobs, you will not be able to get one moving forward because AI is taking most of them, and the immigrants coming into your country are going to be competing against you for them. And if they are qualified for that job, rightfully so, those immigrants should get it. But most of the immigrants coming into these countries are not qualified, they do not meet specific criteria, and they do not integrate. These are the main problems that people are experiencing. And this is why people are protesting this around the world. Yes, you can talk about the baby boomers, they have their own issues and maybe they are responsible for a lot of these decisions. But I do not 100% agree with this guy, and we shouldn't have to, right? No one is ever ultra correct or right, but I like his theories. I agree with some of it, and I like the way he has explained some of these things. In saying that, I don't know what the solution is here.